He is a professor up at the University of Kansas for the last 20 years and has produced numerous publications and books that he put out. He's recently published this book through Daldorph Press called Kansas Poems, a very sensitive and fairly deep set of poems. I'd like to have Brian be able to present it and talk about his experiences here doing this Kansas Poems. He has got, he also does a really awesome group at the Douglas County Jail for numerous years, taking care of, encouraging our inmates to think about life and report it by writing poetry. Brian, take over.
Thanks, Perry. Perry, how long should I read for?
As long as you need to. You know, we have a 2-hour session here, so you could do a half hour, 45 minutes if you want, if you or less, whatever works for you, Brian. I would like to ask you to get your camera so it shows your whole face.
Okay.
We're going. There you go.
Yeah.
Wait.
Oh yeah. Here I am.
Go a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure. Hey, so thanks for this opportunity. I've loved my involvement with the Kansas Authors Club and look forward to the next activities. And you know, as you guys were talking about, it would be just wonderful to have this in person. I mean, I thought that the last one was really good for what it was, but it would be really nice to get together again. So I'm hoping that we can do that soon enough. Let's all hope for that. So I'd like to read some of the poems from my new book. That's what Perry asked me to do, and talk about poetry in general and whatever else. But I'd like this to be really informal. So please, you know, anything you'd like to say, then just please speak up, because, you know, I just think that's more interesting for all of us if you would do that. So I think I know that some of you came to the book launch. Thanks very much for that. And one thing I'm really looking forward to is the presentation by Tracy this afternoon. I'm sure some of you will come to that, about Meadowlark Press. And I've been just so interested in what Tracy was doing with the press, and Kevin too, and Lindsay, just publishing some really interesting work. So I'm just honored to be a part of this. I know Rhonda's been involved as well, and I've really enjoyed her books from Meadowlark Press. So I think most of you know that Tracy is doing a presentation this afternoon, and I'm just really interested in sort of how she's done it, and just everything that it takes to make this work as well as it has. Again, I've just been, it's been just great to work with this press, and I've worked with others, and this has been a great experience. This book came together over many years. There are poems here from at least 20 years ago. I've been in Kansas quite a long time now. And unlike some of the other things that I've written, this was a kind of a gathering of poems. I mean, I think each book that you try to write, you do it in a different way. And sometimes, you know, you can stay very focused on what you're writing, and the book sort of comes together at a certain period. But what I did with this collection of poems was to look through most everything I've written, and to sort of pick out poems that related to Kansas and here in some way, and then to kind of assemble a book manuscript from all of those things. And I mean, it's interesting to me to kind of see how the poems have changed over the years. You know, I hope they've gotten better. I don't know, but so these poems were written over such a long period, and it's kind of interesting to put them together and just to sort of see what happens with the poems from different periods. As some of you know, the book is organized into the 4 seasons. That just seemed a good way to do it. The poems seem to kind of come together in that way, and I think that gave me a sort of structure for doing it, and it was some way of organizing this kind of diverse group of poems. So let me read some of them, and again, please speak up if you'd like to ask questions or make comments or whatever. I think that would be great for all of us to do it like that. This is the first poem of the collection, and it's one that seems especially significant at this moment. We've got some really bad weather to get through for a while, but it will get better, and this is the kind of hope for spring. This is the first poem in the book, and it's called Unfreezing, and it's about this kind of time of year when you just begin to look out for the first signs of spring, and it's wonderful every time. I always make a note of where I see the first flower of spring, and it's very significant to me each time. Unfreezing. First daffodils outside City Hall, facing south. Spray of crocuses in the front yard of 829 East 13th. And in his heart, all the flowers of spring, waiting only for warmth. Because I do think there are times of our life when it's like spring and we sort of come to life in the way that spring comes to life every year. Sorry, was that a question or a comment? Okay, let me read on. So one of the interesting stories that I came across about Lawrence is the visit of Walt Whitman to Lawrence. This was in 1879, and he visited a judge here, and so I based the poem on that. And he stayed at the house 1425 Tennessee, which is now like a fraternity house. So I imagined Whitman kind of looking out on the scene as I saw it. It's kind of a long title, but it's outside 1425 Tennessee, Lawrence, Kansas, where Walt Whitman stayed, September 1879. It's you, old graybeard, peeking out from the tall open window into April afternoon. Leaves and grass tremble in the sweet breeze of your breath. Hawk's shadow rides swiftly across the white sidewalk. No wonder you returned, Walt, to redbuds and dogwoods blossoming, plucky dandelions, weaving martins. Look at these ROTC runners surge by, their strong, manly bodies in sweaty khaki t-shirts. This alone was worth coming back for. I have a pine cone in my pocket. I'd love you to take it back with you to wherever you stay now and wait for me. I will follow in your boot prints. I've always really loved the spirit of Walt Whitman and just that great body of writing and the way that he kind of embraced everything that he came across. I've really loved that about Whitman's spirit, and so I wanted to kind of reach out to him in that poem. I wrote this poem after seeing what's left of the campus of Menninger's clinic in Topeka, just a very famous place with a story that means a lot to me. I mean, taking care of people with mental illness, really trying to understand what's going on with them in a way that was really kind of unusual at the time. Of course, Menninger's has moved away from Topeka now, and there was just a few buildings left, including that famous clock tower. So this poem began in that image of this kind of closed down campus. And when I looked at that, it made me think of kind of times of my life when I felt like that sort of shut down group of buildings. And so I related mental illness, different aspects of that to what these buildings look like. Menninger's, Topeka, May 2008. It's closed for business now. So if your mind's walls are cracked, your windows broken, if your foundation's slipping and you need a new roof after the hailstorm, Menninger's can't help you anymore. Boarded up windows, the famous clock stopped, fences up to keep the bums out, the look and reek of decay. You'll have to find some other place for repair. Just like you, Menninger's is falling down. And Terry mentioned that I've been teaching at the Douglas County Jail for 20 years now, actually. And we went there every week. There was a group of us in the end who taught the class, and we were quite determined to keep going forever, or as long as we could anyway. But in March, that all closed down with the pandemic, and so we're all missing that and hoping that we can get back to it. Who knows with the present situation? We just don't know when we can do that. But there are several poems in the book about the jail experience and the people that I've met and things that have happened. And what I tend to do in writing about that experience is to take a number of different people that I've met and stories that I've heard, and they sort of come together into their own poem or story. So these are not directly factual, but they're taken from things that I've kind of come across and then I put together into poems. So in this one, it's called Visiting Findley, and it's about visiting a son in prison. Visiting Findley. It's a cold spring morning, sunny with clear sky, and I'm driving through Kansas on my way to Mission City to visit my son, Findley, in prison. I wrote and asked if he'd like me to visit. He wrote back, "Yeah, you can come, Findley." I'm on my way to a small town with a big prison on the edge of town that was supposed to revive the city, but instead just sits where cornfields used to be, a big white elephant made out of concrete, misery, and wire. Findley lost his way after he got hurt playing football at JUCO, ruined his knee in a tackle. Doctors did their best to repair it, but said he'd limp for the rest of his life. They gave him painkillers and got him hooked. He slid into petty crime to support his habit, got involved in a robbery that went wrong. The liquor store owner was shot, and Findley got 10 years. I show the guard at the gate my driving license, drive into the parking lot. I imagine visiting him with his pretty wife and first child. With 10 years carved out of his life, how's he going to achieve anything like that? Who'd want to marry an ex-con? It takes me half an hour to get through security, and 10 doors later, I'm in the meeting room, a row of cubicles with chairs in front of glass screens. I sit in my place and wait for Findley, for my son gone wrong, my tattooed, hard-eyed son, the son I tried to love but didn't love enough, the son who never made it easy. I wait for my son. I visited the Natural History Museum on campus, and they had a wonderful exhibit, the Kansas rhinoceros from thousands of years ago, millions of years ago, perhaps, I don't know. But it's a wonderful exhibit there. And I got kind of interested in the Natural History Museum and started reading about it and kind of looking into it all. And I came across this character, Handel Martin, who was a paleontologist at the museum. And I wrote a series of poems about him. And I think one of the things I was thinking about in writing about Kansas was, writing about what's here now, but also kind of digging into this place and seeing what you would find under the surface. And I did that in one way through writing about this character, Handel T. Martin, who was a paleontologist at the Natural History Museum here. And in the first one, it's called The Fossil Man. And this is Handel Martin telling his story about how he and his family came to the States and his interest in paleontology. The Fossil Man. My father was a fossil man too, begging quarrymen at lime kilns in Cropwell to save for him old bones they unearthed in their digging. Ichthyosaurus bones, he told me as I watched him in his workshop articulate them into marvels. In 1886, I sailed to the States, settling in a dugout I made myself out of sod, cottonwood poles, and willow brush in Logan County, Kansas, the richest Cretaceous field in the world, from a fancy house in England to a prairie hovel. It was worth it. I discovered on my own land a fine skull complete of a saurian Tylosaurus. Collecting with Williston in western Kansas, near Hill City on the Solomon River, we found the famous fossil bird with teeth and a bison skeleton with an Indian arrowhead, 30,000 years old, wedged beneath its shoulder. We all leave our marks. I write and feel a pen digging down. At the end of the poem, I was thinking of the way that this paleontologist was digging into the earth, and I was kind of digging into his story with my pen. So he is digging down, and I'm digging down too. That was the way that I ended that poem. In the collection, there are quite a number of missing characters and lost characters, and this is about one of those kind of lost characters who ends up in the mythical town of Mason City, Kansas, trying to get his mind together in some way. Mason City, Kansas. In the Green Lantern Motel, I light a cigarette, pour wine in a plastic cup, feel better, feel the weight lift from my bones. 3 days ago, I drove out of town, across the Flint Hills, into darkness, then stopped in this small town. Abe's Diner, Quick Shop, and Dollar Store. I needed to be nowhere. At night, I walk by the river where fireflies weave their magic. Watch the kids at Goose Park. It takes time to get the sadness out. I light another cigarette. A number of the poems are set in Oak Hill Cemetery, which is really close to where I live. Lindsay and I went out there to make a video, which we showed at the book launch and is now on the Meadowlark website. And so, I mean, I've always liked cemeteries. I've always found them really meaningful. And I've just spent a lot of time at this place in one way and another. It's just the best place to walk and just look around at all of the lives there, all of the spirits there. And one time I saw an old woman there sitting by a grave, and that was the image that started the poem. And then I just imagined the story that she might tell. And I'm sure that all of you do this as well. I mean, you know, we're all writers, we're all artists. And when we see something, we kind of imagine the story of that thing, that person, whatever. And this is what I wrote about that woman, just imagining what story she would tell. It's called The Progress of Love. Most summer nights, she drives out to Oak Hill Cemetery with lawn chair in trunk and jars of iced tea. She likes to sit with him, and if he doesn't talk much, well, he never talked too much anyway. One time she'd asked him if he loved her, and he'd said, "Remember what I told you on our wedding day? If it's any different, I'll let you know." He'd never hurt her. He'd done his duties, never got drunk and rowdy, returned to his side of the bed if she asked. He'd been a good father to their son who died in that stupid war. The way he'd say their son's name, if only he'd lit up like that with her. He'd taken to retirement like he'd taken to everything else, evenly. Old age was like evening time after a day's work, death like sleep, no more frightening than breakfast or an afternoon nap. At his grave on summer nights, sometimes she'd whisper, "Frank, I couldn't help loving you, you know. I'll see you soon. I'll see you soon." And then I'll read one more from this section. I read this one at the book launch, but it's one that I keep going back to. And I mentioned this at the book launch too, and I'll just say it again because it was, to me, an intriguing story. So somebody told me that her parents were getting old and needed one of the children to come back and move in with them and look after them. That happens often enough. And their son came back, and their son had basically been living off the grid. He didn't do a regular job, didn't pay taxes, no driving license. And so in a way, he was off the grid. And so it seemed that he was the best person to come and look after his parents. And there was just kind of an interesting contrast between the way that he had lived his life sort of away from responsibility, and now he was coming back to look after the parents. That was the part of the story that somebody told me. And again, I kind of imagined how that would turn out when the son goes back to take care of the parents. It's called The Prodigal Son. The prodigal son goes home to his parents' house, the only one of their kids free of his own family commitments to look after them in their late years. He doesn't take anything back with him, doesn't need anything, sits with them in the morning, swims in the afternoon, stick-thin arms hauling him through the tepid water of Clearwater Lake. Most days his parents are fine, so he spends his time reading every book in the house, walking downtown to the coffee shop, where he stares out at people busy with their lives. When nothing matters anyway, it might as well not matter here, or he can at least be useful, where every other night he can cook chili dogs and corn, get half drunk in his room on homemade wine. So I'm approximately halfway through now, and if anybody would like to make a comment or ask a question, then please do it. It would be nice to hear from somebody else. But if not, then I will keep on reading and we can just carry on in that way. So would anybody like to make a comment or ask a question or anything?
There have
Brian.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead, Rhonda.
Yeah, Rhonda, please. Yes.
Sorry.
I was just going to make the comment that you are receiving a great deal of comments, Brian. And I mean, I think I speak for everyone to say that we are very touched and blown away by your poems. I look forward to reading my book when I get my copy. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Rhonda. You know, you've been a tremendous support to us all, and I'm so happy that we were able to get you to come to the jail a few times and sit in on that class, because you could understand how much it means to everybody who was involved with it. And I was so glad that you could come and be a part of that. So thank you. Thank you. Perry, you were going to comment too.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, your work does reach beyond just the words themselves. They can really get a good feeling on it. When you get finished, I'd like you, my favorite poem is Your Magnolia in May, Lawrence, Kansas. You haven't read that one, but that's a real incredibly deep poem, I feel. So thanks, keep working up, yeah. And everybody is like, seems to be enjoying it tremendously. Good work.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll come back to that poem. That was in the earlier section, but I'll come back to that one. Thank you, yeah.
Every time I hear these poems, I feel a different way or see something different, and hearing your thoughts behind it is always incredibly enlightening in a certain sense. Just has continued to inspire me to keep looking at things a lot closer and thinking about them for just those few moments more than I normally would.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. Well, I think that's what we do as artists. You know, we see the world and we try to understand the significance of the world. And I think that's what, you know, every artist is doing in one way or another, you know. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad that we could share Oak Hill Cemetery together.
Agreed. I look forward to when we can do it again.
Yeah, when the weather gets better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should I keep going, or does anybody else have a question or comment?
I have one.
Keep on going, man.
Oh, hey, Kevin.
Hi, I have a quick question. What
Sure.
are some of your favorite ways to gather the tales about other people? You know, what are your favorite ways to gather the stories that you tell when you give a dramatic monologue poem or a poem in someone else's voice?
I think, you know, what I've noticed is that you can't really try to do this, that these things come to you or they don't. And it's really frustrating. I mean, it's the same as, I think, making any art. You know, you wish you could do it all the time. You know, sometimes you get something just right and it seems quite easy to do that, but then other times you just beat up on yourself because you can't do it. But it's, you know, it's in a way often things that you don't really expect that just kind of stick in your mind and stay with you. I think, you know, in general terms, I think we have to be kind of alert to the world and be watchful, but I'm sure, as you know, Kevin, it doesn't always work out as you think it does. And sometimes things that didn't seem to make much of a mark at the time, they sort of keep coming back to you and they keep sort of nagging at you, don't they? And then, you know, that's when you write something. But I don't think there's a way to do it apart from just being kind of as open as possible to what comes along, you know.
Well, I so appreciate how you tell other people's stories in addition to your own. Thanks for sharing them.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. And one thing that I've said about that, because it does seem that, you know, quite often I'm kind of using other voices and whatever, I think that the only way that you can do that is if you identify very closely with something that is in that story. I don't think you can do it otherwise. And so even though in a way you're telling other people's stories, I think you're always kind of bringing out something of yourself as you tell these stories, you know. And I don't think you can do it otherwise, really.
Great, thank you.
Sure, yeah. Should I carry on? Yes. Okay, so I'm now into fall. We went through the first two sections and now I'm into fall. And this is one of the elegies in the book for small towns. Again, this is a mythical small town, but I think that it could relate to so many small communities which are often struggling to survive for reasons we all understand. Cooper City. Storefront boarded up, but Jack's Autos is still there with rust buckets, non-starters, and Crooked Jack, who left half a leg and most of his soul in Vietnam. Where Zach's gas used to be, there's a quick shop. High school kids used to hang out at Zach's, but they're long gone to that new school in Taylorville. Main Street's a few hand-me-down stores, some sleepy attorneys, and Zeke Haskins, undertaker, with old Zeke in the window, wondering days on end if he or Cooper City will go first. And there are quite a number of sort of missing people in the book, people who go off somewhere and nobody knows where they've gone. And this is one of them in a way. This is somebody who's kind of stepped outside of things and at this particular moment just doesn't seem to think that he has much significance and gets that feeling that everything could go on just fine without him. And I've certainly felt this at various times, you know, that I'm not really needed in certain situations. And I think that was something that I was thinking about in writing the poem. It's called Chuck. Chuck stands on the porch as lights slinking out of his yard. He can hear his wife's voice inside their house. She's telling a story about her troubles today, and everyone's laughing. Something about what she said to the cop when he pulled her over and what he said back. More laughter. She's loving this, of course, loves to hear what everyone's doing. Carmen had outpatient surgery. Violet's letter about school bonds published in the newspaper. Emily's dog died and her kids want to get another one. We'll miss Tootsie. It's the first cold of fall, so Chuck's glad he grabbed his coat. He lights a cigarette, sucks in smoke, seems to suck in the night air too, and thinks of going away from here. The keys in the car. He could just drive off and keep driving. Through the night, if he's up to it, stop off in some small town and start over, go to high school games, date a waitress named Sue Ellen. His wife's telling a story about their daughter, how she'd always bring home pets she'd found somewhere. Everyone's laughing, and aren't they all just fine without him? This next poem is for one of my students from a number of years ago who was on the football team. That semester I had 5 or 6 football students across the back row of the class. Good students, they worked really hard. They would come to class on Monday pretty beat up, you know, limping in. And this is the story of one of those students. This is pretty much true to life, actually. Ex-footballer. They say he changed. Now he's moody all the time, spends hours alone in his room, headphones on. He'd always been a happy kid, loved sport, of course. His dad took him to games and told him, don't believe the crap about players getting hurt. This game makes you a man. He played in junior high, hit hard, nothing felt better than that. Played in high school where they called him suicide because he'd hunt down the biggest guys. Got a scholarship at a JUCO, then recruited by a Big Ten school. Missed his junior year through injury. Then in his last season, took a hit that knocked him out. He was never the same after that. What to do without his team? Where to go? Where to go? Miller's Creek with a gun and be done with it. All done. Then I have 2 poems in the book about my friend John, who's a Vietnam veteran. Some of you know John. He was in the Ken Burns documentary. In fact, in many ways, he was kind of the standout in that wonderful documentary. And I have a series of poems about him. I've known him for a long time now. I just included 2 in the book. I think they're very much Kansas stories. about veterans trying to kind of fit back in some way. For the book launch, I read the poem Tug of War, but I'm going to read the other one now called Old Soldier. And one time, John and I and a number of other people went out to the wetlands for a Native American ceremony out there. And I just have the image of John, who's pretty busted up from his wounds and everything, kind of hauling himself out to the crossroads, actually, where the ceremony took place. And that was the image that I began with. And then I kind of thought about what we were talking about. It's called Old Soldier. Old Soldier hauls himself out to the crossroads where the damn government's building a new road straight through the heart of Indian country. Damn politicians never change. The old soldier knows that. They'll sell you out for a penny, cut your heart out for 10. Old soldier keeps marching in his broken boots. Soon it will be time to march all the way back to that ambush in the bush. Those shots in the chest that should have killed him did kill him. It's just that he's taking a long time to die. One more poem from this section. This is called Closed for Business. And I think I saw one time a store, I don't even remember where it was now, that was shut down. And I remember you could see there was a mail slot in the door, and you could see under the door the kind of heap of mail that builds up after a time, you know, when nobody's coming round there. And that image stuck with me. And again, I just kind of wondered about the story behind this. And so that's where I started with this poem. Closed for Business. I walk on the leaf-strewn sidewalk past the building that used to be my cake shop. Like a lot of the stores downtown, a sign up, closed for business. Heap of mail under the mail flap. Dusty floor. White counter with cracked glass display case where I set out my cakes, baked fresh every day. My father-in-law set me up in business. He'd been a successful tax attorney, quit when he was 49, did volunteer work, took long walks by the river. Jack always said he hated the tax business, did it to support himself and to give his children opportunities. Jack said to me, "You really think you can make a go of it?" "Yes, sir," I said. I knew how to run a business, how to bake, how to advertise, how to tap my friends at the town newspaper, how to get up and running. Up at 3 a.m. to start baking, home at 7 p.m. after finishing paperwork. So many rules and regulations. My wife, Nicole, loved her hardworking husband, believed him when he told her they'd have to take a loss at first. Takes time to establish a new business. Nicole joined our town's new health club. I worked harder, and just when we turned our first monthly profit, Nicole said, "This isn't working out, is it?" I peer in through the dirty window, see inside the man I was, sure that he could take the right ingredients and turn them into something delicious, something everyone would want to buy. In reading that again, I wonder if I was thinking about Ray Carver's story. I'm sure some of you know Ray Carver's work, one of my favorite American writers, and he has a wonderful story about a cake store owner. I wonder if I was thinking about that. I don't quite remember. No. And then I'll move into the last section called Winter. Just before I do that, while I still remember, this was the poem that Perry asked for, and Tracy Simmons said that this was her favorite poem in the book too. It's called Magnolia in May, Lawrence, Kansas. What we did in my parents' garden, we should have done for our marriage. Plucked off brown, withering petals of the magnolia, dropped them in a black bucket so strong new buds could push through. My mother showed us how to do it. We did it in her garden, didn't do it at home, and then it was too late for flowers. I think one thing I've realized over the years is that quite often you only have a certain period to do something, and sometimes you don't do it even though you think that you should. For some reason you don't do it, and then you just always regret that, and you realize that you've lost that opportunity. And that can be in any number of contexts, but I think that's what I was feeling when I wrote that poem. That, I mean, one thing that I'm always fascinated about by the magnolia, it's just so beautiful, but its flowering is so brief. It's just a week or so, isn't it? And then sometimes then it even gets caught in the frost and you lose the flowers, and they're just there for a few days perhaps. But it's such a wonderful thing, and look forward to seeing that again this year. I'll read just 3 or 4 poems from the last section. This is the first one. This is called First Snow. Lindsay said she liked this poem of the Oak Hill poem, so this is for Lindsay. I stayed up late watching snowflakes fall, writing haiku. Then I went to sleep, dreamt of snow covering me in Oak Hill Cemetery like a warm white shroud. This is called A Park with Yellow Whales, and it started with just seeing a woman at this park in December and just kind of wondering what she was doing there, and kind of trying to explain that in some way. A Park with Yellow Whales. She stops off at the park on Holmes and Delaware with slides, swings, merry-go-round, and yellow whales. Cold as her heart out here in December wind, and that's why she likes it, sitting on the park bench like some young mother watching over her invisible kids, yelling, chasing, playing tag. She lights up her first cigarette in 15 years. If her mother could see her now, she'd be laughing bitterly. She told her that Jack was no good. She feels her mother's scorn like this icy northwesterly cutting through her yellow whales, biting into her white bones. That's a topical poem. We have right now an icy wind from the north. So that one is the right poem to read today. I'll read 2 more poems. This one again influenced by Ray Carver, and I can very much identify with this. And this is trying to get rid of the shameful aspects of your life, and I know this very well. It's called Empties. I can't carry them out in December daylight, set them out beside the garbage sacks for Tuesday morning pickup. So I drive out late to Clinton Lake, stand on the bluff and hurl them like grenades out into water, watch for small white explosions. Let them sleep with the fishes, these empties, these failed poems, all my little shames. And then I'll read the last poem in the book. And I said this before at the book launch, but it just seems appropriate that the book ends with an estate sale. This was the estate sale of my neighbor here when I first moved in. An old lady, I knew her fairly well. She was there for about 10 years. And then she died, and all of her things were sold off in an estate sale. And it's just it's just a particularly significant moment when you see that kind of selling off the all of the things of somebody's life. I mentioned too that for me, the poem was very much under the influence of Thomas Hardy's wonderful poem, During Wind and Rain. I love Thomas Hardy's poetry. It's absolutely magnificent. I mean, I don't know how he managed to write as much as he did, all those great novels and a huge collection of poetry. And most everything I've read by Hardy is just brilliant. But this particular poem, During Wind and Rain, the last image of the poem is a raindrop running down a gravestone. And that's always kind of stayed in my mind. And I was thinking about that when I wrote this poem and looked out at this old lady's possessions all just kind of out on the sidewalk, and they'd been left out overnight and they got caught out in the rain. Estate sale. All day Saturday, a crowd at my neighbor's house on 13th Street, empty for 5 years. The auctioneer rattles off his call, $1, $1.50, $1.52, the way they do it, There's not much left of her life. Boxes of junk sold off as lots for a few dollars to traders in bib overalls and baseball caps. 23 chairs, good for firewood, on the sidewalk. Thermometer registering 53 degrees in February sun. Sunday morning birdsong and the odd car. Outside her house by 13th Street, the leftovers of her life. Brass floor lamp, split cushions, old books and pictures, wet through from last night's rain. That's what I'd like to say. Thank you for the opportunity. I love everything to do with Kansas Authors Club, and look forward to everything else that we'll do together. So if you have any questions or comments, then I'd love to hear them, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Brian. We really greatly appreciate you presenting yourself today, and we loved the work. It was awesome.
Oh, thanks, Perry. Well, it's always great to be involved with you, whatever we do. So thank you.
Hey, Brian.
Hey.
Thanks for the invite and the heads up.
Oh, sure. I'm so glad you could come.
That's a really fine reading. I'm kind of curious. Am I right? Is the title of this book Kansas Poems?
Yes, it is.
So how do you see yourself as a Kansan now? I mean, I've known you for a long time.
Yeah.
And of course you are from elsewhere. So I wonder if you could probably answer this in several different ways, but I wonder if you ever noticed some kind of shift in the way you wrote about Kansas and about yourself as an insider, or maybe beginning as an outsider looking in and then as an insider. I wonder how much of that is in your bones now after this long.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I can't help feeling like an outsider here. I mean, because I think in many ways you are where you came from, and so I do feel like I'm kind of a bit of a pretender here. But that, this is my perspective, and there are many other ways of writing about this beautiful place that other people can do. This is just the way that I see it. As far as the question that you asked, I think that in looking at the poems, the kind of older poems and the newer poem, I think they've certainly flattened out in many ways. I mean, if you look in the collection and the poems that I read today, there are quite a number of prose poems. And I think, I'm not sure if I'm just being sort of too obvious here, but I think the poems have kind of flattened out, and that would seem to be significant in this place. And I think certainly from what I've seen looking at the older poems and the newer poems, I think the first poems were more kind of imagistic and shorter and more structured, and then the later poems are more kind of narrative. And I think perhaps that's something that I've picked up over time, is kind of the stories of this place, and they've come more into the poems. And I mentioned this at the book launch, but I think that Gary Lechleiter has been a big influence on me, because he's just like this wonderful Kansas poet, and he knows the stories, and I love Gary's poetry, and I think in some ways I've tried to kind of imitate him and other writers too, but Gary comes to mind because he's such a, to me, such a kind of, you know, archetypal Kansas poet. Does that answer your questions?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think also that was an excellent question on your part. And I think, and Brian, you can answer that better than I, but I think that being an outsider sometimes gives us more insight. We tend to, if we're living in something, as we have all of our life, we tend sometimes not to see it or question it
Sure.
at the same level as we do. Hello to Timothy, as we do when we go into it or immersed in it from afar or from a different culture. I think it's more impactful, certainly, but was curious how long a time period some of these poems, I know you mentioned some of them were older. Is that like 10 years or what's the time frame in there?
It's certainly 20 years, at
Okay.
least. You know, there are a number of sonnets here, and I was writing those a long time ago. It's at least 20 years. I would say yes, about that long, really.
Thanks.
The title of the book, Kansas Poems, that was the title of my file that I was just putting these poems into, and it just stuck. You know, you've all had that experience, I'm sure, about sort of organizing a manuscript and then trying to come up with the right title for it. And I never came up with a better title than that. I mean, this just seemed exactly right for what I was doing here, so I stuck with it. And as you all know, it's kind of intriguing how you get to the title of a book, and sometimes it's kind of the last thing that you do. Sometimes it's the first thing that you do, and you kind of organize the book around the title in some ways. But with this one, it just stuck there. It just stuck there and didn't go away. And I never thought of a better title than this. And in the end, it just seems absolutely right. And that's what you're trying to get to, of course, you know.
May I make a quick announcement or invitation before anybody scampers away?
Sure.
It just came to mind when Brian mentioned Gary, who's one of my